Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, or if you're new here, welcome officially to the channel. This is, as you know from the intro, a series where I go into odd game accessories or peripherals that developers made to get us more into the game mentally or physically. Today, I have something that was an interesting and, well, a deviation in what we commonly call the modern controller. Today I want to talk about a relatively short-lived but interesting controller design in the Steam controller. I know, you guys always think I'm going to talk Nintendo when I say these things, and usually I do, but this one's all on Steam. So if you have a moment, hang out as we go into one of the more interesting modern oddities in gaming. Take a look at what it did right, what it did wrong, and debate if maybe it should have another shot. The modern controller as we know it is, well, a spike of inspiration and, well, evolution over the years. Going back to the most commonly recognized first controller, the Atari 2600 controller, which wasn't the first, but probably the one we all recognize the most. This was a more arcade-like stick with a singular button. The next big change would be with the NES and its D-pad, adding in extra buttons and a more compact design, which would have a lasting influence that would continue to this very day. So on it went with shoulder buttons and more face buttons like the SNES gamepad. Triggers would get added next in grips, making the controller more ergonomic, and so on it went. So it was strange when Steam opted to not only dive into the controller business, but to do it in a way that it really hadn't been done before. Their first, and to my knowledge only controller, the Steam controller, is a bit of an oddity. This controller was released in 2015 around the same time that Steam released a new Steam box hardware, which, for those of you who didn't know, was more of a console form factor of a PC running Steam in big picture mode. The idea behind it was to get the PC more front and center in the living room. To make that easier, they wanted a controller that could replace a lot of the functionality of a keyboard and mouse setup and feel familiar like a standard controller. To do that, they designed a controller that used two haptic touchpads, a single analog stick, 4 face buttons, 2 bumpers, and 2 triggers, and a button on each side of the grip. Now, there are a few interesting things about this design. The first is the single analog instead of 2 analogs, which looks like it was the left one mostly for standard movement, with the right haptic touchpad for looking around. However, that's not the only way to use these touchpads. They can all basically be configured. They could be set up to emulate a trackball, a mouse, joystick, and D-pads, almost any input you could think of. I know it sounds weird. I mean, how would you even know where you were holding these things? Where would you know where you were at on them? You see, that's one of the cool parts. They were set up to give feedback to let the player know where they were on that surface. All of this was a huge innovation to the existing controller as we know it, especially the grip buttons on the back, which would go on to be used in later controllers in the form of like paddles and grip buttons on the back of 8-bit controllers and the PS5 Pro controller. What was the reception like for this controller though? Well, initially it sold fairly well, selling around 500,000 units in the first 6 months as an eager group snapped them up, curious to see what Valve had come up with and how well it would work. The enthusiasm wasn't met with just overwhelming accolades though. Many found it hard to use, having many issues adjusting to the trackpads, and others having issues configuring it to work right with the games that they wanted to play, as it would take a fair amount of manual configuration depending on what you were intending to play. People also had some criticisms of the build quality, and the fact that it didn't come with rechargeable batteries, which, to me, for a $50 controller seems like a rather silly complaint in the grand scheme of things. The main problem I think that they had with this though was, Yep, it's the mouse and keyboard. It's very hard to sell PC users on a controller when they're used to the complexity and flexibility of this combination that they've been using for ages. The idea of ditching their larger rigs and computer desks and setting up shop in their living rooms, even in 2015, just wasn't that appealing. It's a concept that most PC gamers aren't really enthusiastic about, even today. Now, it was also hard to get the console market to adapt such an alien controller and get them more into PC games, as they found it awkward to use for the games that they wanted for those control schemes, and they really didn't feel like most of the games would benefit much from a more mouse and trackpad-like controls that this controller particularly offered. This left the controller in a weird spot where it wasn't really suiting either audience, and had to carve out a niche with people who were willing to give it a chance or weren't fully happy with either solution offered, and didn't really want to have a controller connected to their PC, as they didn't like that control scheme either. In the end, regardless of its flexibility and the power it gave players who were willing to put in the time to play games in new ways, the device was discontinued in late 2019, running just over 4 years in production. However, there have been rumors of revisiting this tech in the future, possibly being advertised as a good way to use the Steam Deck when docked, instead of hooking it up to the staple mouse and keyboard. In a way, the Steam Deck may potentially breathe life back into this someday, as it's finally starting to bridge that gap between PC and the living room that Valve's been trying to do for years and years now. However, what do you guys think of this one? Did any of you ever have one, and how well did it work? Do any of you have the Steam Deck and wish you had one of these to hook up to it at all? Let me know in the comments. And while you're there, if you could, leave me a like. And if you haven't, consider subscribing. That really helps this channel out a lot. Until we meet again though, have a great rest of your day, and happy gaming.